Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirame Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We will sing No One But Me to Blame on page 23.
Sun goes down, it's
Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is dealing with difficult people. What I would like to do is begin with a little bit of an exercise, if you like, and that is, since the topic is quite relevant as it might seem to most of us, since I think all of us have encountered difficult people in our lives, and so it will be good that even before we reflect on how to deal with them, we first remember them. So what I would like you to do is, I'm now ring a bell, and close your eyes and just think of all the difficult people you have met or who you remember. Don't dwell on them too long, unless some have been so difficult that they demand attention. But otherwise, just in your mind, just take a look at all the difficult people you know in the life. So close your eyes when I ring the bell, and don't open your eyes until you hear the bell again. Okay? So I hope this time was enough for you to think of all the difficult people you have seen. As I was trying to visualize it, it was quite amusing. I just felt myself smiling at all the faces that passed before me. Okay, here is one question. You don't have to answer this question, but just answer it in your own mind. Among all the different faces that you saw, did you see your own face? What is it? No, you don't have to tell me. You said it. It's good. It's good that if some of us have seen our own face in it. So I think one of the difficulties of defining who a difficult person is that when we see ourselves as difficult and when we characterize someone else as difficult, there is a little bit of a difference in that. And I have met, and I'm sure many of us here have met people who sometimes say, I'm a difficult person to deal with. And usually when people say that, there is a kind of a little bit of a smile on their face. So when people think of themselves as difficult, it's not in a very negative sense. There is a little bit of a pride, in fact, in that, to say, well, I'm a difficult person to deal with. But when we think of someone else as difficult, the connotations are a little bit different. The reason it's difficult to define who a difficult person is, because in this kingdom of the difficult, if you like, there's enormous diversity. We know that being difficult can be a function of time, because some people are difficult at some time and not difficult at others. Some people may be very difficult in the morning, but they may be just fine the rest of the day. Or it's a function of the person itself. That is that some people might be a person may be difficult for someone, but not difficult to someone else. It's a function of work. A person can be difficult in a certain activity, but maybe not difficult when not engaged in that activity. Or it could be a function of things like illness. That person is difficult when that person is not feeling well, or there are health issues. Sometimes we'll see people who are perfectly fine, when there are health issues, suddenly become difficult to deal with. Also, sometimes some people we see in spiritual realm, people who we see as very holy, or even saints and mystics, are not people so easy to deal with all the time. So the word difficult, really, it covers a very large spectrum of people. And so it does raise questions such as, what do I mean when I say a person is difficult? Is being difficult an intrinsic trait, or it's an acquired trait? Which is to say, are people difficult from their very birth, or it's something that may have happened, that at some stage of their life they have become difficult? One other question we might want to ask is being difficult an objective truth or a subjective experience? And of course, most importantly, how do we deal with a difficult person, which is the primary focus of today's reflection? So in a very general way, we can say that difficult people are considered to be difficult because they are difficult to work with, it's difficult to communicate with them, or it's difficult to live with them, or it's difficult to understand them. Again, one or more or all of these may be possible in a person, which is why we then tend to characterize them as being difficult. Now, how do we deal with them? How do we deal with such people? Since all of us have encountered in the past, or maybe are encountering at present, and are hoping that we don't have to encounter any such people in the future, how do we deal with these people? And of course, the simplest way, the easiest way, is to avoid them totally. Unfortunately, that's not always possible. What if the people we find difficult are the people we bump into every day, or the people maybe living under the same roof? So it's not possible to avoid these people. Then the next best thing we can do is to find creative ways to deal with difficult people. And the book that I have often referred to is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's an old book. I'm sure many of us here have heard about it, and many of us have read it also. It does have very useful tips about interpersonal relationships and communication. And this can greatly help us in dealing with difficult people and making difficult people our friends and influencing them in some way, in a positive way. Now, I read that book back when I was in India. I was a teenager, and I'm sure many of us have read it because it's an old book. I've read it many years ago. And I was very fascinated by that book as a teenager. Reading it, it just seemed so practical. And it seemed to work. And so I was a big fan of that book for a long time. As I grew older, it seemed to me that while that book has very good tips, and it might seem as if using those tips I'm able to change other people, making them my friends, influencing them in some way. But as I grew older, I found it was not so much changing them as changing me. If I seriously start putting those tips into my own life, it was changing me more than it changed them. Or if it changed them, it was more in relation to me than with the general people. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that using the tips in that book, if I succeed in making someone my friend, it's not necessary that that person would automatically be friendly with everyone. So it's something that is in connection with the person who is trying to implement those tips. And that's why there's a very obscure sentence in that book, comes towards the end, which I like very much, in which Carnegie writes, "The principles taught in this book will work only when they come from the heart. I'm not advocating a bag of tricks. I'm talking about a new way of life." And I like this very much. And it's such an obscure sentence. It's not even emphasized anywhere. But if we use these how-to books, not simply as a bag of tricks, as something to kind of manipulate relationships and manipulate people around us, but if we see them as something that can change me, the way I deal with other people, the way I understand other people, then I think they can be very helpful. So when we change, the world around us and the people in the world around us change for us. So we are not here talking so much about objective change, which is certainly possible, but primarily it's a subjective change. And that is why it would be more accurate to conclude that being difficult is not so much an intrinsic trait in a person, because there'll always be people. If I find it difficult to deal with someone, and therefore I characterize that person as difficult, there will always be someone or the other who will be able to deal with that person effortlessly, who may not find that person as difficult. There's another question that we can ask. If I see someone as difficult, how does that difficult person see me? Is it possible that a person that I see as not difficult, but a difficult person may see that same person as difficult? So if I'm difficult, is it likely that I might see more people difficult around me? Swami Vivekananda dealt with this in his talks on Dhyana Yoga. And the simple principle is this, that I see outside. I will not be able to see outside what is not already within me, at least in a seed form. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there is one aphorism. It says, "Ahimsayam pratisthayam vairatyagaha." It deals with ahimsa, non-violence. And we know non-violence is considered a great quality, a great virtue to strive for in our lives. So Patanjali says that who can be considered to have been established, firmly established in that quality of non-violence? Who can be said to be completely non-violent? And Patanjali says that person can be considered to be established in non-violence, in whose presence we would not be able to even think of violence. We would not be able to think of enmity in the presence of that person. In other words, even in order for me to see violence outside of me, there has to be these seeds of violence in my heart. If I am completely good with no seeds of selfishness or jealousy or all of these negative traits, I would not be able to see them outside of me. Swami Vivekananda once wrote in a letter to J.J. Goodwin, his stenographer, who took down most of his lectures, and to whom we owe the 9 volumes of the complete works that we have now. Swamiji wrote to him, he said, "We Vedantists must try to look at everything from a subjective standpoint." And that's the approach a Vedanta student might take. So when I see something outside, instead of one way and a common way, I guess 99% of the people in the world would say, why is that thing that way? Or why is this person doing it that way? That would be a very kind of a normal way we might think of doing it. But there is another way. And a subjective way would be, why am I seeing it that way? The world that we see is colored. It's not, no matter how good an eyesight I might have, I'm not just seeing things. I'm not simply a camera. A camera would just see things. A camera will not react. But when I look out, when I hear sounds, when I see people and objects and all of these sensory data that's coming to me from the external world, I'm not simply sensing it, I'm also reacting to it. And what I really see is not just the sensation themselves, but sensations colored by my own reactions to it. Really, I'm just seeing my reactions. And therefore, if I see difficult people around me, if I encounter difficult people around me, I may not see myself as a difficult person, but the seeds of that difficultness are somewhere there in a subtle way in my heart. If they were not there, I wouldn't be able to see difficult people outside of me. And that's why, in exactly the same way, when we see about, for instance, some of the lives of some of these great mystics, we look at the life of Ramakrishna, for instance, we see him so often saying, this world is filled with the presence of the divine. We just see the blissful divine mother everywhere. And then we look at around the same world that he lived in. You could even go to that same temple complex, the Dakshineshwar temple, where he lived most of his life. And you can just see around. It's wonderful. But how many of us see the presence of the divine where he saw the whole place filled with the divine? When Ramakrishna went to Benares, for instance, he saw a city made of gold. Now, we do go to Benares, and it's very uplifting. But how many of us see a city made of gold? So what these mystics saw, they were able to see outside something very different from what the rest of us see, not because something was changing outside, something had changed inside. So when something changes inside, the world outside changes for them. So that's one principal rule of life, which is really what makes the song that we had in the beginning so relevant. No one but me to blame. For all the defects and mistakes and problems that we see around us, we are contributing to it in some way. Or at least the reason I'm seeing it, because my vision hasn't become clear yet. I said that being difficult is not therefore an intrinsic trait, but it's a trait that is acquired or that may have been triggered by some reason. So trying to understand what that reason might be may make it easier for us to deal with a person who might seem to be difficult. For instance, if you find someone difficult to deal with in the morning. Today, for instance, if you meet someone, especially in the morning, who's rather grumpy or not not reacting in the way that person normally does, and say, why are you so being difficult today? It's possible that probably they didn't remember early it was a daylight saving. Maybe that 1 hour of less sleep may have kind of triggered this temporary phase of difficultness. Now, what I'm suggesting is that if we become aware, or at least empathize or try to know what may have happened in a person's life, even if we may not always get the answer, but to at least acknowledge that there may have been the reasons why this person is being difficult to me. With that empathy, it might be easier to deal with the person. If we see someone as intrinsically evil, intrinsically bad, then there is really nothing much to do other than thinking, well, this person is just a devil incarnate, and then there is nothing you can do about it. Well, there's nobody anything. Devil has never been, people have never been able to finish off devil. He's been always there. So if you see someone as a devil, then there is really not much of a solution. But if we see that, well, this person may be acting in a devilish manner, but if I recognize that there may be some reason behind it, then there is a chance, there is hope that when that reason is eliminated or removed, or at least acknowledged, then it may be easier to deal with such a person with greater empathy. So let's go back to asking the question we asked in the beginning, that who is a difficult person? And if we see that a difficult person is complicated in some way, then it becomes easier to answer that question. The word complicated, it's a very nice word, actually. I was looking up the etymology of this word. Well, what did this word really mean? And it comes from Latin. It's a combination of two terms. Com is together, and plicare. I'm not a Latin expert, but I imagine that's how more or less how it is pronounced. So plicare means fold, and complicare, so complicate and complicated. All this word comes from folding together, folded together. So a complicated person, there are a lot of folds inside. It's not as simple, it's not as straightforward. And that reminded me when I'm thinking of folds, that is the kind of imagery presented in Vedanta as well. When we speak about these different layers, different folds over the spirit, over the Atman. And these folds get described differently. Sometimes we speak about 3 folds. There is this gross body, the subtle body, the causal body. These are the technical terms used in Vedanta. Or sometimes we speak about the 5 folds. There is the body, the mind, the vital force, the intellect, and so on. There is the ego. So there are different ways that these folds get described. But what's important is that the real me, the true me, is somehow remains buried under these folds. And as long as I don't know the real me, and what we might say in a language more familiar to us, as long as I haven't become spiritually enlightened, I am a complicated person. As long as I see myself as with these folds, I cannot but see other people with folds as well. Which is why, because I see myself as a human being, and a human being from a Vedantic standpoint is already a complication, because a divine being is covered with these folds, these material folds, which is what makes a divine being a human being. Now, because I see myself as a human being, I cannot but see everyone, others, as human beings as well. If one by one my folds go away, the world will change for me. Swami Vivekananda mentioned once that the world that we see is the world that is circumscribed by the senses that we have. So we have 5 senses, so that's how the sight, sound, smell, touch, and that's the world. Even it's a very limited world, because even the sight, human sight, we can't see everything. There is only a certain frequency within which our human eyes can perceive. Same thing with regard to sound. So it's a very limited world that we see. And we know if any of my senses become non-functional, if I become hard of hearing or if I become stone deaf, then the world will change for me a little bit because the sounds are then eliminated from my world. Or if I acquire a new sense, let's say a sense which can, it's a magnetism or electricity, then the world will also change for me. Because there are already these magnetic forces around me. I'm not able to see them because I don't have senses to catch them. So the world that I see is directly related to the capacity that I have. And because right now I see myself as this complicated being with this body and mind, it's easy for me to see everyone in the same way. Let's say in the course of our spiritual evolution, as a Vedanta student, and because we sing the Nirvana Shatkam here, and one of the things that we see is that, well, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, and so on. Now, it's possible that in the course of our practice and understanding, our mind or our intellect may become more real to us than the body. It's not that the body disappears, but somehow the world of ideas becomes more real. You don't really have to be a very spiritual for that to happen, because for many poets or writers or creative people, even artists, for them, the world of ideas, concepts, colors, that has become more real. And which is why these great works of art, creative writings, and so on, have come because somehow that world, even for scientists, and which is why we read in the lives some of these great scientists and artists and so on, when they are immersed in their creative activity, they forget food, they may not sleep for days together and not even feel it, because somehow the body has become less important. The needs of the body have become less important than the needs of the body, in the mind and the intellect. So in the course of our spiritual journey, if at some point we begin to feel ourselves more as a mind than the body, yes, the spirit or the Atman might come later, but let's say just the mind, our mind becomes more real than the body, the world will change for us. Not that we won't see bodies around us, we will. But when I'm speaking with a person in front, I will primarily see that person as a mind. One mind communicating with another mind. One intellect communicating with the other intellect. So we always, the world that we see is directly related to how I see myself. How I see the world, it depends on how I see myself. And therefore, if I see myself as a divine being, not simply intellectually, but if that's the experience I have and I try to remain absorbed in that experience, then I will begin to see everyone. And that's the idea. So the opposite, in fact, a week or two ago, we were just thinking about this thing about difficult people. And one of the questions we wrestled with was what would be the opposite of difficult, a difficult person? And one possibility, and clearly not the only possibility, well, the opposite of difficult is simple. And of course, a simple person doesn't convey this, doesn't seem to be an exact opposite of a difficult person. But if you go to look at the word simple in a special way, then it might seem to make sense. A simple is something that is not complicated. And so we might see a simple person as a person without any folds, without any complications. And in a Vedantic language, one who has transcended all these layers. The word that gets used even in describing God in some traditions in the Indian subcontinent is sahaja. And the word sahaja is often translated into English as the simple one. There is a Bengali song which Ramakrishna used to sing. It says, Sorol na hole, sorol ke na jai chena. In other words, I will not be able to recognize the simple one unless I become simple myself. And so God is without any complication. God is transparent. God is purity itself. And God is therefore the ultimate in simplicity. And in order for me to recognize God, to see God, I will have to become simple myself. We also remember Holy Mother's teaching that if you want peace of mind, don't see the faults of others, rather see your own faults. Well, this they're saying is clearly very, very true and very practical, but it's also very philosophical. And that is, I cannot see the faults of others unless I acknowledge my own faults. The reason I see difficult people around me is because I am difficult myself in some way. And when I remove those complications in my own heart, then I will see nothing but God outside of me. Now, clearly, if that principle makes sense, then most of our time, energy, and resources as students of spiritual life should be employed to making ourselves less difficult or simple. And recognizing, therefore, that the more simple I get, the more simple I will be able to see outside. Until, obviously, while God's grace, anything can happen. We might suddenly find ourselves, our complications have been removed in the next 5 minutes, which will be great. If it doesn't, what do we do then? Well, which seems to me to be a practical thing to do is, even while we continue our own practices to try to remove our own complications within us and try to become simple in every way, we then try to apply the simple common sense rules while dealing with people whom at present we see as difficult. Because we need some amount of harmony around us. While the goal is to recognize the divine within, it doesn't help for a spiritual seeker to completely ignore the world. Actually, it's very counterproductive. Because sometimes people might think, oh, I'm so much about spiritual life, I don't care for anything. I think that's a bad strategy. I think we don't have to become obsessed with the perishable things in the world, but we have to care for them. By care, I mean to recognize a simple thing, and that is, if what I am seeking is harmony in my own heart, then we need at least some measure of harmony around us. If I'm seeking the source of happiness around me, it's certainly helpful to have as many happy people around me as possible. If I'm seeking that deep peace and calmness in my heart, it is certainly helpful to have as many calm and peaceful people around me as possible. So, even from a kind of enlightened self-interest, try to make other people happy, because if there are happy people around you, chances of you retaining your own happiness are more. It's really very difficult. If we have people, grumpy, angry, complaining people all the time around us, it's very difficult to be happy ourselves. It's very difficult to experience that calmness. So we must care at least enough for the world to bring about at least some amount of harmony around us, within our family, within our circle of friends, whichever circles we move in, the ability to try to live in harmony with people around us, that itself can be a great practice. Uh, it seems one Christian mystic, I don't remember his name, was once asked, what spiritual, you are an ascetic, what kind of austerities do you perform? And he just said, I live in a community. Now we sometimes we read in the books that these great spiritual seekers, they went into deep forests and in the caves and mountaintops and did so much physical austerity. And we say, oh, well, nowadays we don't do anything. Actually, no, I think there is a lot of opportunity for every one of us to practice austerity. And one way would be, can I live in harmony with my members of my family, with my friends, at my workplace? It's possible that I disagree with people around me, maybe totally disagree with the way they think, the way they do. But if that disagreement is just going to make me more frustrated, more angry, that's not doing any good to anyone, because it doesn't help them, doesn't help me. It's impossible for me to meditate and pray if I'm just all the time angry or upset about things. And therefore, an austerity would be to try to live in harmony, even in circumstances, even with people who may be very different from us, who may have ideals and goals very different from us, who may think very differently from us, which is okay. The energy and time that we may employ in trying to reform other people and change other people, I think is better employed in changing and reforming ourselves. To the extent we become better human beings, we might acquire some amount of ability to try to help people around us. And a lot of help that occurs in daily life is not so much through advice or not so much through trying to go and change other people. You just by being a good person ourselves. It's often not recognized that for a spiritual seeker who daily does his or her daily prayer, daily meditation, speaks lovingly, calmly, peacefully with other people in their own lives, such a person is already transforming people around them in a very subtle way, without even meaning to do so. They say the best form of teaching occurs when the teacher is not out teaching someone and the students don't even know that they are learning anything. And in fact, and this is going to sound, I don't know how it's going to sound, and most of the things that we have learned in life are through this kind of a very subtle, unconscious messages that have come around us right from the time we were young, just by what we saw outside or this kind of a chance conversation we overheard. A lot of the way our lives get shaped is not through formal teaching, not through lectures, not through reading of books, but just through these interactions around us. And while this can change us unconsciously, the change might be quicker and better. We might be able to bring about a quicker transformation if we become conscious students rather than unconscious people bumbling their way through this, muddling their way through this life. And that's what Ramakrishna meant when he said, as long as I live, so long do I learn. So let us focus most of our energy going forward, dealing with the difficult person who is inside. And a little bit of the energy, so most of our energy to deal with the difficult person who is inside. A little bit of the energy to deal with the people who we see as difficult outside. Because, take it from me, dealing with the difficult person inside is a lot more difficult than dealing with all the difficult people outside. So it really needs more time and energy. recognizing it's quite likely, in fact, it's almost certain that those people whom we see as difficult are also struggling, often consciously or unconsciously, with their own difficultness. Just like if we have become aware of the complications in our own heart, just like we are struggling, trying to remove these difficultness, if you like, within our own heart, it's quite likely that the other person is also struggling. And as fellow travelers on the journey of life, let's extend, if we can extend a helping hand, do so. If not, let's just pray. It's a little bit like the walk for hunger that we have once a year. Or if you're on a long journey, and then maybe some people are just lagging behind, they need a helping hand. Some people trip and fall down. Well, if it's possible for me, help the person get up. If it's not possible for you, well, at least pray for the person. And I think that would be the ideal way for a Vedanta student to go forward. So here are some of the ideas that came to my mind about dealing with difficult people. And I'm sure there's a lot more to think on this subject. So when we go out, and if you would like to share when we have our discussion there about how you have found it helpful to deal with difficultness, either inside or outside, and if you feel like sharing, we can talk about it there. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Next Sunday, we'll have Antar Yoga, as we do every month. We'll have readings, spiritual readings, brief reflection, music, prayer, meditation, and also March. Now, birthdays of everyone born in the month of March. So please, those of you who are born in the month of March, and if any of your friends and family members, no matter how difficult they may be, bring them along. Maybe attending that Antar Yoga might make them less difficult. So that would be a topic next Sunday. On Wednesday, we'll continue with the study of Bhakti Sutras. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our meditation will continue as usual. Tuesday, it's a little bit iffy because of the storm. So if you are planning to come on Tuesday, before you come for the meditation, just check either the calendar on our website or Facebook, Twitter, or on channel 5. So generally when there is a cancellation due to a storm, we make announcement through all of these. Or if you don't have access to any of these, then you can give a call. But if you can minimize the calls and try to find from one of these, that will make life a little bit easier for me. Okay, thank you. So let's conclude with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.